How are you, Mr. Vik Ghai? Vik, how are you today?
Great, Gotham. Good to connect with you, and good morning to you in Melbourne.
And today we will talk about psychology of venture capitalists because you, as a venture capital, working for quite some time, so we would try to get into the core of it, what they think, how they think, why they think, and all these sort of things. So, first question is from outside. When we see these venture capitalists, many founders think they bet on ideas. Which is more important, the human, the pedigree, or the idea?
Hey, first of all, thanks for having me here and helping me think through some of these questions. I really liked it the way you approached me about it. And to your question, whether it's the human versus the pedigree or the idea, look, we are a very early stage fund. So that means we are the first check in to most of the companies. And at early stage, even in the age of AI, and I started my first company in the age of .com, the failure rate has not changed much. It's hovered around 90% for early stage companies. So the 10% who make it, it's all about the human. So what we are looking for typically is, and that's why my fund is called G2C Ventures, right? Grit to capital. It's not idea to capital. It is grit to capital. It's all about the human grit. Do they have the grit to go through 6, 7 years of grind to be successful? And in the meantime, they're also going to have, as a company, probably 2 or 3 near-death experiences. So you really look at the grit. We look at the human. We of course look at the pedigree in terms of do they have some domain experience. Degrees in schools are not as important to us as it could be to some of the other funds. But I've been in founder shoes, so what we're really looking for is can they be in a founder shoes? We know the idea will most likely evolve. They're going to pivot. The pedigree tells us, do they know this domain or not? If somebody comes here and wanting to do a mining automation company, but they never worked in a mine, that's the kind of pedigree we look for to say, why don't you speak to somebody who at least worked in that space? But other than that, for us, it's all great. And some of our founders who built a company from 0 to 40 million ARR in 3 years. Those founders, all we remembered about them is the grit. The day one they walked into the office, they had the confidence they're going to do it. They have made a couple small pivots in their journey, but the reason they have success so far is because of the grit. So clearly the human.
So then, when it comes to the human, then it comes to the conviction or the clarity or the resilience. And sometimes the complicated thing is controlling the ego
Oh,
also,
yeah.
right? So how you evaluate that?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I think as a VC and why we think this whole industry is not quite ripe for agentic automation yet. As in, I get asked all the time, would I speak to a VC agent very soon? Maybe for some of your due diligence work, but not so much because one of my main goal is to observe the founder, and a lot of it is not necessarily coming through Q&A, but more coming through osmosis of us discussing different things. And you know, even if we go for a walk, we go on a hike, we go for a coffee, ego shows up actually very fast if things go sideways. Either something is not happening on time, or they had planned for A, but B happened. And you can quickly see that before any sort of resilience is showed up, ego has a way to show up faster. So we look for observe that. We may not react to it right away, but we definitely observe for that. We are actually mostly looking because we're an early stage fund. We are mostly wanting to evaluate, do they have the resilience, right? Because it's not so much the journey, it's going to can they correct the path to their journey over and over again while they get through to the end goal. So a lot of we do have founders walk in and say, I'm going to create $1 billion company. Sometimes that's the first thing they say, or maybe somewhere in the middle when we ask them a question, they're going to say, "This is $1 billion company," and we actually love it, even though it sounds a little crazy at that moment. We actually have had happen to one of another company. one of my partners invested in called Observo AI. Sunil met the founder. That's exactly what I heard. They want to make $1 billion company, but they had the path also to get there. Not just that they wanted to create $1 billion company. What will it take? They had thought through that. People who kind of think through that start to the end journey. I think that's the kind of resilience and clarity we're looking for, conviction in themselves, and really watch out for that ego all the time because at least not going to sit well with the early stage of any company.
Can you really differentiate between this, like a bold vision versus delusion versus disciplined optimism?
That is another part of my role. You're absolutely right. You're kind of digging in exactly what's happening in our heads when we are speaking with the founders. And we like this bold vision. And then very quickly we have to see, all right, the vision is bold and we like that. Most VCs would like a bold vision because that means a big TAM, a big market, a big outcome. But what we immediately are looking for is can they articulate the path, not just the destination? And that comes from more of a disciplined optimism, is that the word that you use, than a delusional player. Delusional player may show us their sales numbers or their growth numbers. That's what you would call them delusional. But if they have the right assumptions behind those numbers, actually we would call that disciplined optimism. So it's the same spreadsheet, same numbers, but if the assumptions are right, we are looking for that because everybody can do a spreadsheet today. If you don't know it, you can ask ChatGPT to do it for you. But more importantly, what we're looking for is do they have a path on how they're going to walk through it? So that's kind of what we are typically look for. I mean, generally, delusional founders cannot show anything beyond the next 6 months clearly. They're going to hum and haw about many things, and we may look like this is real, but really they're devil in the detail, and there's really no detail behind it. They just have a great idea, but the path has not figured out in their head. They haven't talked to enough people about what will it take to go through that journey, and so we kind of screen out for that.
Now, as a VC, how you see these immigrant clans? Okay, because we are from Indian origin, so I'm not talking about Indians, but the immigrant clan.
Yep.
I know they have like more survival instinct as an immigrant, we all have. But do they really have bigger vision?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, this is personal for me, and it's personal for our fund also. G2C Venture partners, they all happen to be immigrant, but like as you say in US, everybody in the United States was an immigrant at some point or another, other than the native Indians. So there's definitely a nation of immigrants. At times in our media discourse, we forget it, but I think back in the head of every person I met in the United States, whether they go back 2 generation or 3 generations, they are an immigrant. And hence we are very, as a country, very underdog, survival instinct people. I mean, if one value of United States is to always support the underdog, I think that comes from our root being an immigrant. At the same time, for VC, when we see an immigrant founder, we don't necessarily evaluate them differently, but there's certain pattern recognition around that. And we're not, the real edge isn't survival instinct. The real edge is can they build something from nothing with no safety net, right? I think that's the biggest edge that immigrant founders have. They built their life typically in some cases, like myself, right? When I arrived in the country, I had 6 months of tuition money and two bags, and that's all I arrived in US for. And but that is the story probably for every immigrant, not just me. And then building from scratch is what we see that when we evaluate founders who want to build an enterprise AI company, right, where they have to be in front of a buyer that may evaluate them for 3 months, 6 months, maybe 12 months before they buy, do they have what it takes? And they know what it feels like to be evaluated for that long before being allowed to actually deploy your product or roll out your product. And that comes from somebody who has built from nothing. So survival instinct is important, but I think the bigger skill that we're looking for and that we see the immigrant founders have a unique advantage on is building with no safety net. And they can take that risk almost like, they tell themselves over and over again, there's nothing to lose.
So, as you have seen many founders who have done that, failed, back again, what break them more? Lack of product market fit, or loss of face, or loss of identity, lack of execution? What actually breaks them?
Yeah, being a founder, I've been a founder myself. I've been doing angel investing for 10 plus years. Fund one has about 14 companies across the portfolio. So we see a lot of founders, maybe some distance, but we watch them. I think you ask a very insightful question. Typically, founders are in a lot of stress. They're in this, they have every morning they have to get up on their own to, they're not reporting to anybody. They're not even reporting to the board. If people think they are reporting to the board, of course, the board has an influence over them, but most founders are reporting to themselves. So people are generally, especially driven founders, they're generally very harsh on themselves. They're working long hours. They have this founder mentality, so they want to own a lot of things. They want to do a lot of things. They have to manage their customer expectations, employee expectations, family expectations, board expectations. And sometimes the founders where they get a loss of identity, who they are, why they're doing it, what's the purpose, either because either they have raised too much money and kind of gotten it to their head, or they have had three or four, some negative activity, lost a customer, lost key employee, something going on in the family that is out of the control. That silently starts hurting their identity. I think that's probably the bigger issue that what we have seen. And then they start making decisions to protect their ego. I think the question you asked earlier, and not the company. They start making decisions to protect their, I had decided to do it, hence I will do it no matter what. I mean, we started hearing some of those things. We know this is early warning signs. Look, product market fit is always going to be a challenge, especially in the age of AI. Things are moving too fast. You may have had a perfect product market fit, but when a new model based company make that your product a part of their plugin, you're going to have product market fit issues, but you can recover from that. Those issues are more visible, but they're also more fixable. But identity crisis typically is silent. And then when you hear it, as I said, you don't necessarily get to see it right away. You would hear in this process of osmosis by dealing with them. So one of the things we do is we stay in touch with founders more often than a typical board will. We're at least doing at least one monthly check-in with the founder. We have a nice office here in Palo Alto. We have founders come here and work out of here, buy them lunch, get the team here to come in and do a team building exercise, things like that in our office. The goal is for us to make sure the founder doesn't get through any crisis silently, or if they have a crisis, they're able to, share with us without any judgment in their head.
No, that's nice. So, when someone is struggling, founder especially, is there any signal to tell that they will break or bend and grow?
Oh yeah, that's a tough question. I'm not so much a psychologist, but I can just tell you to
From
the
your
best of my
experience?
ability what I have seen happen in the past. And I've gone through some of those setbacks myself. There is no perfect startup. Media may highlight all of the great things that startup founders do to have fun, and it's all hunky dory, but every founder would go through exactly the thing that you asked for, whether they be breaking or they're bending to the pound, breaking or growing. The signal I think that probably the most important is sometimes, let's say I see something is not going wrong, or something not going well and something is going wrong. I may not ask them about that particular instant because it's too close to them, but I may ask to them talk about their last failure, talk about a setback that they've had, in the past, and how did they deal about it? Actually, I was talking to a founder who said, I'm very harsh with myself, and I really want to accelerate this one project they have in their head, but it's not coming together as fast as they would want. And rather than discussing with them about that particular topic, I turned them where else have they turned their lifestyle, and they mentioned well how they moved from, in this case, an immigrant founder from Europe. They had decided to gonna go come to Silicon Valley, and they told themselves that, and how they made it happen. They had the conviction. They figured out the path. And the way they handle that question tells us more about whether they're going to grow or they're going to go break, because that brings the clarity on they have done this before. So now it's a matter of just reminding them that they can do this again. It may look more challenging. Meeting our founders is to not necessarily be their mental coach, but definitely have them think through, especially if there is a challenge that they're going through. We of course don't want any of our founders to break. So we don't impress on too much of what's focusing on wrong in the moment, but focusing on what the right is and how they have, extracted themselves in the past. And then, hey, look, we're always ears if you want to bounce off any ideas in the current situation. And actually, we've seen a good response from founders. They are more open to it because we've had an honest discussion about it. I think honesty is where what I would say is if I can is a good signal whether they're going to break and grow. If they always say, "Hey, in the past I've never had this," or "In the past it was so easy," we know that wasn't really necessarily the case. That's a good signal of whether they're going to break or grow.
Because I'm working in this mental health early intervention sector, and especially UK and in Australia, they are really did a good work about bringing lived experience people close to the system, because they are apparently seeing things which people are not seeing just with education. As VCs kind of matured in last 2 3 decades, I think this lived experience is still very underrepresented as a skill in this business sector. Do you have any thoughts on it? Like, can it be a really a game-changing, another crucial skill into the puzzle?
Oh, absolutely. I think we have a thought and we have a thesis around it. Our our thesis for G2C specifically, we have a five-step checklist, if you may, on when we fund a founder. But one of the item on that checklist is lived experience, or what we call domain expertise. And we think today, in the age where, thanks to AI and vibe coding and other tools, where programming is becoming easier and easier, shipping software is becoming easier and easier. Lived experience is the only differentiator a founder can have, and the domain expertise is a must-have for in the vertical where they want to start a company. So somebody who just we funded a company called Examine in the commercial real estate space. The founder had lived that experience working at other firms in commercial real estate. Otherwise, it's very hard for us to just fund somebody, because we think if you haven't lived that experience, if you not understood the problem, the vocabulary, the nuances that an AI agent frankly cannot understand, if you have not understood the decision making process in that lived experience, that's not the right candidate for at least our fund criteria, investment criteria. So, people who have owned this experience are the only ones we are actually funding. We know that people can try very hard and open doors for themselves. But if you have the lived experience, you know which are the right doors to open. So that's the difference we see between somebody just working very hard and somebody who knows what they're talking about and also working very hard. And so lived experience is a must-have in our domain for investment from G2C Ventures.
Silicon Valley, typically they see the whole world as their potential market or as their potential, playground. Because of lack of capital, a lot of entrepreneurs outside Silicon Valley, not even in US, like me, for example, they're
Yeah.
struggling in different countries, and not getting that extra edge or the door how Silicon Valley can leverage, or we can leverage Silicon Valley to have a more meaningful conversation so that we can also part of that ecosystem.
I mean, our model, I would say, does right now focuses on investment in United States. So that doesn't mean we limit ourselves to Silicon Valley. Our a deal we closed earlier in the year, Actual AI, they are a software that is really a help tool, like a cursor for CTO or VP of engineering, director of engineering. It helps manage developers and their agents based in Seattle, other parts of the US. Right now, at least for G2C Ventures, we're US focused, so not just Silicon Valley focused. What we look for in our five-step criteria, the Silicon Valley is a nice to have, but not a must have. But we have criteria like lived experience, criteria like do they have real traction in their local markets or the vertical enterprises that they're targeting. So my suggestion would be, if people want to get involved in venture, one, start having more dialogue with, VCs like myself, because typically we would want to know you for 3, 6 months before we would ever write a check, right? We generally do not sit here and say, okay, great idea. This founder must have landed from Mars and let's fund them. We have to know you because some of the questions you asked earlier, they're more important than the technical knowledge or pedigree, but more importantly, who you are as a human. So reach out to us. I think Silicon Valley is very welcoming, very open community. A lot of events happening here, so you can always come and attend. On an average day today in Silicon Valley, I just came back from a RSA security conference in San Francisco. But on an average day in San Francisco, there are about 10 to 20 events related to entrepreneurship or AI or arts or explainability or trust in AI. So you name it, it's there. I'll even give a shout out to the AI Collective, which is about 200,000 members around the world. It started in Silicon Valley in San Francisco, but the AI Collective is growing a club own city. And if you don't have one, start one. It's not that difficult. We'll provide you all of the infrastructure to start a collective. And the goal is to have dialogue before you come for a pitch. And the dialogue could be in whatever area of focus. Could be mental health, as you're mentioning. A lot of people have anxiety about AI. A lot of people have a fear of AI. A lot of people see opportunities in AI. I think the best thing to do is put these people in the room. Capital access, of course, I would say is probably the best in Silicon Valley, but it is in other parts of the world. In fact, our own fund, we have LPs in United States, but there's interest from Dubai, from Europe, even India, Singapore, who are LPs in our fund. So, there's interest in capital from just about anywhere in the world, especially in the age of AI, where making companies is easier. There's even more interest in entrepreneurship than just Silicon Valley.
So how VCs are seeing AI? I mean, definitely they are replacing jobs or shifting the job market from one place to another, taking away the decision-making authority, or democratization of skill and power will happen more. I mean, the reason I'm asking this question, I mean, how VCs are seeing anybody can do anything. This
Yes.
concept.
That look, this whole idea of entrepreneurship is maybe been there forever. We're in year 2026, so it's been around 2000 years. This idea of working for a large corporation has been only around 150 years. If you go back in history, we did not have mega corporations. We've had people taking care of their own businesses, their own artisan skills, and selling that. So the AI, in a way, helps us take back to the time where we just didn't sit around and worry about working for corporation X or Y. We actually did our own thing because you can be I had somebody come to me and pitch a company, and they're a pastor who got tired of losing people in the church, not coming back to the church because the church was not getting back to them in time. And they said, I want to do God's work, but if the people aren't there, how do I perform God's work? And they picked up one of the tools and started developing a software to fix that problem. And they said, look, all the other paperwork we had back in the back office, we just not set up to properly use it, train our people. So they wrote an agent. He himself wrote an agent. And I think that's the kind of an idea that, look, it is about not firing people from church because they have an AI agent now who send SMSs and reminders and responds on time if somebody inquires about baptism for their kid and so on. But it's really the idea is to having even a pastor write code or at least write an application that they need. Earlier, they would have written a complaint to their supervisors, but now they are actually doing something about it. So we see AI democratizing in that way. And yes, there's definitely going to have AI-based job replacement going on. I call it more like AI-based job transition, right? Even today in US, there are more job openings than the number of people who are applying for uninsurance benefits. So the issue is more reskilling of people and not so much that there are not enough jobs. Now, the question is, are people willing to change their career when they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s and say, hey, I want to go back and learn something new and get a different type of job? I kind of see that responsibility on ourselves. If you kind of wait for corporate America or corporate Europe, corporate Asia to fix the problems for us, look, they're going to fix the problem for their shareholders. And in each individual case, you are your own shareholder. You can make your skills better. So I kind of see this as a democratization skills. And going back to Kanwal's comment earlier that AI will help create more entrepreneurs, more people who can help themselves. Our portfolio companies examines, they calculated they gave 30 hours per week back to every commercial real estate manager. So they can do more outbound work. The company Actual.ai I was mentioning earlier, they're helping engineers get 25 hours per week back and not chasing teams on what they did right or wrong. That's real time gained. Now, does that mean I need less engineers or will there be job changes? In our view of the world, this is actually empowering those workers, augmenting the enterprise workers, not necessarily replacing them. What negative I have heard is since I've been using the tool, I work more because I get more done every day. So I have more stuff on my table. So I know we do need to address that. But I do see AI replacing jobs, but I see the benefits of it making people more capable. And just like anything in the world, you can either look at the moon or you can look at the dirt and focus your energy on either of them. You have your choice.
But definitely, this is what you said is absolutely correct. We are probably in a transition where at this stage, more and more stuff we have to do, as a founder, which is, you know, like, okay, before you have to send email, now you have to send like bulk email and everything is like, yeah, I am feeling that and I'm feel overwhelmed that how much really I can do. Do I have all those skills? But maybe we are in a transition that way. We are almost in the end of it. So the last question to you, will VC decision making become more algorithmic down the line or more human?
So whether you would be talking next to an agent Vic versus me, is that what you're saying? Uh,
Maybe because the
yeah.
other day I was listening to one guy and he said down the line there will be Michael Jackson and AI Michael Jackson, Beatles and AI Beatles. So maybe we, we are talking on the
Yeah,
same line.
and maybe I'll take on that too. There will be some things that an AI Michael Jackson can maybe do better, maybe better planning for Michael's scheduling and so on. But then there's certain part which is I would call more of the art of what he does, and I think you can really be able to see what is AI generated Michael Jackson versus the same thing I would say for the VC. As a VC, my job is sourcing, selection, providing value-added services, and also all the fundraising and the LP management that goes with that. So I do see some parts of my job is already going a little bit algorithmic. For example, sourcing, right? We as a fund get about 40 inbound inquiries every week. And some weeks it's actually 100. So 40, I would say, is an average. Some week we get 100 inquiries. We can't respond to all of them, but we do want to respond to all of them, at least evaluate all of them. So we quickly go through them using, of course, think about all the tools that are out there to be able to see, do they fit within our fund criteria. We have five different criterias at the outset. Do they even look at that? So that is already happening. Some of the things where we are going out and reaching out to founders that we like, we track them on LinkedIn, we track them on GitHub, we track them on many other sites. So that part is pretty algorithmic. But the conviction about the human that we are dealing with, the founder, that stays very human. I've not seen an algorithmic bot or an algorithm that has cracked it yet. Because, what we're really betting on at the end of the day, at least for an early stage venture firm, after all of the criteria, at least five criteria I mentioned, the human, the founder is perhaps the most important one. And we're trying to really understand, are they crazy or are they crazy enough? Right? Or, they're always going to play defense, they're never going to play offense, things like that. Or we were discussing earlier in the start of the discussion, do they have the grit to walk through, 5 years in a chaotic environment, and they have to be the adult in the room every day. They have to have fun, but they also have to be the one not panic, or they're the one who have to come up with a newer direction because another company's AI agent just killed their market or undercut their market. So none of those kind of assessment are, I think, algorithmic today. There where I would leave it. So maybe there's 10-20% of my job is getting algorithmic, but the rest of it is, very human to human, especially even discussing with LPs. LPs want to know who we are, how we assess. There is no algorithmic answers. That's one area where I don't use any tools to respond back. The best thing to do is to have a good thesis, tell them in a way that they can understand it, and give feedback and listen. I think I don't do that all the time very well, but there are some of the things when I'm listening to a founder, listening to an LP, is where I probably have my best listening skills. I'm sure my wife will remind me of that comment that I need to include her in that group. But absolutely, listening skills I think is more important than the algorithmic skills for that kind of assessment.
Nice. So we are hopeful that the human part will be there, have to be there, and that is the
Yep.
most critical part, as you were saying. So on that, we should end our podcast here. Thank you, Vic. Thank you for your time.
No, thanks, Gautam, for having me. Enjoyed it. You've touched on some very good questions, and look forward to more of these.
Excellent. Thank you.